I think now that we're pretty fired up, now's the time to get Mayor Corrigan out here. I think we're ready for that. We have lots of myths in our culture around politics of the scrappy politician who fights for the people, that kind of stuff, and I usually don't buy that stuff, but this has been pretty inspiring, so I'm pretty excited that there's a mayor like this in Burnaby, and I don't live in Burnaby anymore. Every time I drive into it to come to work here at SFU, I'm happy that Mayor Corrigan is on guard. I don't think you sleep. So please welcome Mayor Derek Corrigan.
Well, thank you. What a wonderful welcome. What a warm welcome to our park. I am so thrilled to be here to say hello to all of you and to introduce you, for those who haven't been here before, to the Burnaby Mountain Conservation Area, one of the crowning jewels of our city. This conservation area, it's gorgeous, isn't it? You know, I'm here today with many of our city councillors, and often the mayor gets credit for the work that the city councillors do on an ongoing basis. But on councils, a mayor is one vote. It's not like the systems they have in federal and provincial politics where the leader gets to tell everybody what to do. In cities, the mayor has one vote on council, and if the council doesn't support what the mayor does, the mayor doesn't do it. So I'm so pleased that everything that I've done has been supported unanimously by my council, and I want to give them credit for that. I have with me today Councillor Sab Dhaliwal. I have Councillor Paul McDonnell. I have Councillor Nick Balco. And with us also is School Trustee James Wang. They're here to represent our council, but also to show their support for what we're doing to be able to take on Kinder Morgan. I want to particularly say thank you to Chief Carleen Thomas and to Grand Chief Phillips for being here today. It's so nice to have their support and to know that the Tsleil-Waututh, the Musqueam, and the Squamish are behind us. The Coast Salish people are working with us. Such an important aspect when you look out and you find there's friends. And you know, the correspondence that I receive is now coming in from all over the world. I walked into my office the other day to a message from a gentleman in New York who had phoned and said how much he appreciated us standing up for our city against Kinder Morgan. That's really something for a little city like Burnaby. And even better is that I went onto Facebook and I found one of my nieces had wrote, "My uncle is awesome." Now, how many guys get that? I'm so pleased that we continue to get letters and correspondence and emails that support what we're doing. There are so many people from across British Columbia who are recognizing the challenge that we're taking on and are stepping up to support us because they believe in the same principles that we do here in our city. You know, this mountain was originally given to Simon Fraser University. It was given as endowment lands by the city of Burnaby to an educational institution. And they began building the SFU University, but we were worried a number of years ago as to whether or not they would be able to, given they were a provincial government organization, whether they would be able to protect these lands. So the city of Burnaby got together our finances and we agreed to buy back Burnaby Mountain from the university. You know, it shows you how important this was to our city, is that we went in and we paid cash and traded land to the university to ensure that we were the ones who were going to be the guardians of this conservation area for perpetuity, that it would be our city and our residents that would look after it. And then to be doubly sure to put a belt with our suspenders is that we went out and had a referendum from our citizens in which our citizens voted. They voted by referendum and said this would remain park forever until the citizens voted differently. That's how important this park is to us. So don't think for a moment that this conservation area isn't important to every single citizen in this city. We've done some polling, as you probably saw on our website, and 70% of the people in Burnaby are supporting us in the efforts that we're making. And more are being added each and every day as people begin to understand and recognize this issue. People are coming on side. Politicians around the Lower Mainland are beginning to realize that this is an issue that deals with the solidarity of municipalities and politicians to fight against the kind of corporate interests that are tending now to control so much of our culture. You know, I can remember being at occasions like this when I was 20 years old at Easter Beans in Stanley Park, with hair down over my shoulders, if you can imagine that. And we were protesting, and we were protesting big issues. We were talking about nuclear weapons and the threat that all of us could die from a nuclear war. And we were protesting the war in Vietnam and the expansionist policies that were being practiced there. We were protesting over women's equality and racial discrimination, and we began fighting those battles I fought for all of my life. But what we didn't see coming up behind us was the corporate culture, the idea that multinational corporations could become bigger than countries and more powerful than countries, that they were able to lobby in a way that no citizen could, that they had full-time employees who were sitting in places like Ottawa, talking in the ear of the politicians to convince them to do what they wanted. And pretty soon those politicians, far away from us, began to believe what they were told. They began to believe that their interests coincided with the interests of the multinational corporations. There's a few who continue to stand up, people like Kennedy Stewart, who make it clear that they're not buying that kind of argument, but there are many that are buying it, who are believing that these corporations are acting in the best interests of the citizens, when in reality, they are acting in their own interest and in the interests of the bureaucrats who run those multinational corporations. Think about it. Kinder and Morgan, the two fellows that brought you Enron. Now, here's two guys, they were smart. They got out before the arrest started. They took their money and put the money into pipelines. Did they change their attitude? I don't think so. I don't think so. Because just the other day, a reorganization of Kinder Morgan put $800 million more into Richard Kinder's pocket. So on a simple reorganization, not because of the fruit of his labor, not because of innovation, not because of creativity, it was a reorg that allowed him to do that. And he still continues to sit in what is a trust company that pays no American taxes. So this massive profit that is going to his corporation doesn't even get taxed at the time that Richard Kinder is taking home his $500 million a year. Now, for those of you out there, I don't know how many of you earn $500 million a year out there, but you can imagine the drain on our economy that it is, that these corporate bureaucrats are able to milk the wealth away from people. Do you think Richard Kinder cares that in Enron, all of those employees forever lost their pensions? Richard Kinder's okay. He sits there in Houston, able to control a corporation that can reach its tentacles out to anywhere in the world in order to implement the kinds of policies that companies like Kinder Morgan want. Let me tell you just a little story about what happened in this pipeline. Is that prior to this all beginning, is that Kinder Morgan went to the National Energy Board and said, we need to get additional money in order to do this application. They went before the National Energy Board, and the National Energy Board awarded them $135 million as a surcharge on oil to be paid by consumers and non-taxable for them to build a war chest in order to be able to implement this application. So, you remember all that stuff you were taught about, that people risked capital to be capitalists? Not here. The reality is, in fact, Ian Anderson boasted at their last annual general meeting, he boasted that they were doing this application and it wouldn't cost the shareholders a penny, because this money was all being taken from the Canadian people in order to sponsor this application. Now, think about it. Now, think how that makes me feel, because the city of Burnaby is carrying all of our opposition on our own shoulders. As a city, we're looking at our own funds to be able to fight back against an application that is overwhelming. It's our staff in this little city that are doing all that work to produce 1,500 questions that we are asking about whether or not this project is going to have a massive deleterious effect on our city, and we've been working hard to try to show that it is. But Kinder Morgan, bought and paid for by the National Energy Board, the very body that will eventually make a decision. So how do you expect the board is going to rule when they've already made a $135 million investment in seeing this project go through? It makes everyone feel a lack of confidence in the impartiality and objectivity of the National Energy Board at the very least, and all of us are concerned. Think about it. So, we have stood up against this. We've stood up aggressively against this because we don't believe anything Kinder Morgan says. We haven't from the very beginning. Those of you who remember how this project started, it started as a twinning of the pipeline. Remember that? The twinning of the pipeline. It was a little bit like the twinning of the Port Mann Bridge. Oh yeah, that bridge they're now taking down is they just killed the twin. And in this case, there was no intention to put that pipeline down the existing right-of-way. From the very beginning, they were looking for new routes in the city of Burnaby to be able to utilize for their pipeline. And now, they're proposing to cut down trees in our community, to bore holes into our mountain, to tunnel through our mountain. Now, I don't think they're going to be successful in doing that. I don't think that seismically this mountain will be able to take that. But that's not good news. Because what Kinder Morgan is looking at, and what I believe they're looking at, is to say to the National Energy Board, sorry, we did this, we did the geological testing, but we can't bore through. But we found a route through the conservation area for a right-of-way that we can utilize, and that's where we want to go. We want to be able to push through these beautiful forests, through all of our wildlife, in order to take this pipeline from their tank farm where they will store 5 million liters of bitumen oil to Burrard Inlet to put onto super tankers that will be plying the Burrard Inlet for decades into the future. Now, I think that is the scariest concept for us as a city and as a province that you can imagine. When you think about the potential catastrophe that could occur as a result of one of those tankers being damaged in our inlet, the destruction that that would cause to the reputation of this city, the destruction that it would cause to the people that surround that inlet, the destruction it would cause to the wildlife, and never mind the tourism. No one would want to come to British Columbia to see what was one of the most beautiful cities in the world because of one accident and one tanker. And we've just increased those odds by 7 times as a result of this project. That frightens me, and it frightens all of you. I'm sure you'd be out here on a day like this because you know these are the consequences of this project going through. I'm so proud that citizens in my community have stood up like Broke, who are willing to take this on, citizens who are putting in a huge amount of effort personally to do this. I can't say enough about the people who are carrying the weight of this on their shoulders. And what's more is that others like Nope in the North Shore are calling on their politicians to stand with us in solidarity, and they're forcing this issue on. And the City of Vancouver is standing with us, and Gregor Robertson and Vision Vancouver have come out and said they're supporting what Burnaby is doing, and they're supporting opposition to Kinder Morgan. And it's very important that we recognize that. When people talk about not voting, it couldn't be any more important for all of you to vote in these elections coming up municipally in November, to get out and support the politicians who are in solidarity with the kind of principles that we have here in the city of Burnaby and that we know that we share with you. We are out there working to make that happen. I just saw that we had Greg McDade come in as our council. Welcome, Greg. Thank you for being here with us. He argued this case the other day in BC Supreme Court. Kinder Morgan, I felt bad and lost sleep over this, but Kinder Morgan was apparently disappointed that we took them to court. I didn't know. I went home and I told my wife, I said, now I've disappointed Kinder Morgan. What am I going to do? The reality is that Kinder Morgan wanted to go back and get the right to cut down our trees and to bore into our mountain from the National Energy Board. Remember those guys who gave them the $135 million for the application? Those guys were going to make a decision on whether that was right or wrong. We decided on the advice of our council that we were going to court, to the Supreme Court of British Columbia, to enforce our bylaws as a city against the federal government. That we are the little city that could. And we are working our way up that mountain. We're working our way up that mountain because we're going to make people believe that local government is the most important government, that the government closest to the people is the government that knows what people want. And you know who I learned this from? Is that I learned this from our brothers and sisters in the First Nations who stood their ground. They went to court and said, we've been oppressed, we've been pushed around, people have taken advantage of us, we want to stand up and we want to say no. And the courts recognized that they could. And in the most recent decision, in the Chilcotin decision, is they said that governments must recognize local interests. They must appreciate the fact that people live in these communities and they cannot, from 5,000 kilometers away, dictate what will happen to our land. So someone told me the other day, they said, well, really, can you take on the federal government? And you are a junior government. I don't like that term, junior government. But said, you're a junior government. How can you possibly take on the federal government in an issue like this? I mean, really, it is a David and Goliath battle. And I said, well, that's an interesting argument to make, because if you'll recollect, David won. And so we are fighting this battle with our council, with a dedicated staff, with a council that's committed, people like you who are stepping up, people across this country who are standing with us, people who believe in what we're doing, because what we're doing is a symbol. It's a symbol of people believing in their right to protect their land, to look after their neighborhood and protect their community. And there are many believe that we can't do it, that we will be unsuccessful. But I am believing more and more and more each day that we'll win. We'll win because people like you are there to support us. So, on behalf of the city of Burnaby, on behalf of our council, our staff, but most importantly, on behalf of all of the citizens of my city, we thank you for being here with us today and for standing with us in solidarity on this issue. We'll continue to fight this good fight. We will continue to work as hard as we can to ensure that the interests of our citizens are represented. And if anybody can do it, I can tell you, it will be the city of Burnaby, as Kinder Morgan has bitten off more than they can chew in this community, and we will be victors. Thank you very much for coming out today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Corrigan for Prime Minister.